Every conflict has a beginning, but in the Middle East, those beginnings are tangled, bloody, and sometimes invisible. Why does the world keep coming back to this region? Why do events here ripple into every corner of the globe, from gas prices in California, to refugee camps in Europe, to TikTok feeds about war and peace? Welcome to Fault Lines, the Middle East Unraveled, a series that tears back the curtain on history's most fragile borders, secret deals, and decisions that still haunt millions of lives. In each episode, we dig into a single moment, a single choice, and show you how it set fire to decades of unrest. And today, we're starting at the beginning, or rather, the collapse of an empire that lasted 600 years, and the secret map-drawing session that quietly wrote the script for some of today's bloodiest conflicts. In the early 1900s, the Middle East wasn't a patchwork of small states. It was one vast empire, the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, it controlled a mix of ethnicities, religions, and trade routes. But by World War I, it was crumbling, the so-called sick man of Europe. The war itself was chaos. Europe's great powers were clawing at each other, and the Ottoman Empire chose the wrong side, aligning with Germany. When the Ottomans lost, it wasn't just defeat, it was erasure. Here's where things get messy. Instead of letting the people of the Middle East decide their own fate, Britain and France secretly carved up the region. You've probably heard of it, the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. Two diplomats, one British, one French, sat in secret and literally drew lines on a map. Lines that didn't care about tribes, religions, or centuries of cultural ties. And with a few strokes of ink, they decided who would control what. Britain got modern-day Iraq and Palestine. France took Syria and Lebanon. This wasn't negotiation, it was colonization, dressed up as stability. But what happens when you draw borders with no understanding of the people who live there? You create time bombs. Sunni, Shia, Kurds, Arabs, Jews, all lumped into artificial states under foreign-backed rulers. That chaos, it didn't disappear after World War I, it grew. Within decades, nationalist movements surged. Iraq rebelled, Syria plunged into coups. Palestine became a flashpoint as Jewish immigration rose, culminating in the creation of Israel in 1948, and the Nakba, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced. The so-called peace, built on artificial borders, collapsed almost immediately. Wars broke out in 1948, 1967, 1973, all rooted in how those borders ignored reality. And it didn't stop there. The Iraq-Iran war in the 80s, that boundary conflict had roots in this same story. The US invasion of Iraq in 2003, still tied to the British carving out Iraq as one big, oil-rich state, despite deep ethnic divisions. Even ISIS's rise in 2014 was fueled by how these borders clashed with the identities of people on the ground. And the world still pays for those secret meetings from over a century ago. Look at Syria today, a war triggered by internal rebellion, but complicated by borders that shoved rival groups together. Look at Iraq, still trying to balance power among Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds. Look at Israel and Palestine, arguably the single biggest flashpoint born from this very era. For Gen Z, this might feel like ancient history, but here's the reality. These old borders affect your world. Refugee crises, they stem from these conflicts. Rising oil prices? Same. Even why countries like the US, Russia, and Iran are constantly playing chess in the region. It all loops back to one question. What happens when outsiders decide who belongs where? One detail often overlooked is how Britain and France promised different groups, different futures at the same time. Britain promised independence to Arab leaders if they helped fight the Ottomans, while also promising a homeland for Jews in Palestine through the 1917 Balfour Declaration. The result? Betrayal on both sides. Arabs felt deceived, and Jewish communities saw opportunities that clashed with Arab aspirations. That contradiction planted seeds of mistrust still alive today. and then came oil. At the time of Sykes-Picot, petroleum was just becoming the lifeblood of modern industry and warfare. Iraq and Iran's oil reserves made these new borders even more politically charged. Western powers didn't just want to stabilize the region, they wanted control over its resources. This obsession with oil-shaped coups, wars, and foreign interventions for decades to come. Even today, control of oil routes influences everything from US bases in Qatar to Iran's power in the Persian Gulf. Let's not forget the cultural side. For centuries, diverse groups lived under a flexible Ottoman system that allowed local autonomy. After the empire fell, new Western-style nation-states tried to force different peoples under one identity, ignoring tribal loyalties and religious differences. It was like trying to lock strangers in the same house and expecting harmony. The result? Civil wars, ethnic cleansing, and extremist ideologies rising as people searched for identity and security. These weren't ancient hatreds, as some claim. They were modern conflicts, born from artificial designs and broken promises. You see, history isn't just about dusty maps and dead empires. It's about real people, millions, living in a world shaped by decisions they never voted on. That's why understanding this moment matters, because those invisible lines are still fault lines today. As we speak, those artificial borders are still under pressure. In 2024 and 2025, the Gaza war has shaken global politics. The Abraham Accords and new alliances are trying to redraw power balances once again, with Saudi Arabia and Israel flirting with normalization, while Iran resists. In Iraq, protests against corruption and foreign influence echo the same frustration of a century ago, that outsiders and their imposed systems don't work. Meanwhile, Kurdish regions across Iraq, Syria, and Turkey still demand recognition, proof that the lines drawn in 1916 never really solved anything. And global powers, they're still here, but with new names: drones, cyber warfare, proxy militias. The conflict map has gone digital, but the core issues, they're still about identity, borders, and who gets to decide the future. So when people ask, why is the Middle East always in conflict? Remember this moment. The Ottoman collapse wasn't just the end of an empire, it was the start of a century-long experiment that failed millions of people. Next time, we'll look at one of those fault lines up close, Palestine, and how one decision after World War I set the stage for one of the most polarizing conflicts in human history. Because here's the truth, until we understand where these fault lines began, we'll never understand why they keep breaking.